Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's September 6th, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host today. If you want to join in the discussion with questions or comments, you can send them to us at questions@schillerinstitute.org or post them in the chat page. Well, we're entering a very busy period of conferences with significant implications for the building of a new development architecture. There's an ASEAN summit that's underway in Indonesia. The G20 summit will meet in India on Saturday. The Eastern Economic Forum is coming up in Vladivostok. And all of this is following the expansion of the BRICS, which puts the transition out of the unipolar order on the table. And of course, the Schiller Institute will hold an online conference on September 9th, which will be addressing these questions under the headline, "Let us join hands with the global majority to create a new chapter in world history." Helga, can you summarize for us where things stand following the BRICS summit and going into these events?
Yes, I think that the momentum of building a new economic system is, according to an insider who is very much involved in constructing this new economic system, is going on in a breathtaking speed, which even him, who is an old hand in these matters, is surprising completely, because things are moving very fast. And I think the most obvious thing to say is that, while the BRICS 11 process is going on, basically 6 more countries joining the BRICS by the beginning of next year. One of them is under severe attack, Argentina, by the financial powers to be, and I'm sure this will come up in the discussion period. Nevertheless, this process is inspiring all of the global South countries. And on the other side, it is also very clear that the so-called global North, meaning, the North Atlantic countries on both sides of the pond, the establishment is not reflecting on what that means, that the majority of the world is moving in a different direction. But it is very clear that, while the Ukraine war is not going anywhere, at least not from the standpoint of those who would like Ukraine to win, it's escalating, and that involves many dangers. But there's also a clear sign to increasingly shift the conflict to the Indo-Pacific, or another aspect of the conflict to the Indo-Pacific, to Taiwan, and just keep doing what they were doing, trying to have global NATO, an unipolar world which no longer exists, and at the same time, because the mass media control only that small portion of the population in every country who are self-motivated and who are following individually their own sources, reading and watching TV and radio and media from China, from Russia, from Africa. Those people are completely aware of the fact that with the BRICS development, there is a completely new strategic situation, which also creates completely new options for countries like Germany, for example, or Italy, France. But the majority of the population is left in the dark, because if you read about the BRICS related developments, all you read is, tensions between India and China. That is the reason why Xi Jinping is not going to the G20 summit in Delhi. Putin is not going. So obviously, I think it was The Economist, Bloomberg, they said, quoting actually unnamed sources, that this will be used by the Europeans to put utmost pressure on the Africans to distance themselves from Russia and China. Now, I would say this is too late, because, the awareness of the countries of the global South in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, about this new strategic, let's say, division that the majority of what used to be called the non-aligned movement is now in earnest trying to set up their own economic system, which allows for the development of all of them. That is unstoppable. And I really think that no coup, no effort to, destabilize color revolutions and usual kinds of things will not be sufficient, because right now we are in, I think, a historic change, I think, as it occurs once in 1,000 years, because this ends colonialism, which started around 1500. So I think one could also interpret the fact that Russia and China are not going to, at least not the heads of state, to the G20 summit in India, and they sent the foreign ministers instead, may have to do something with the fact that, the break of trust between the global South and, what used to be, NATO and still is NATO, is so deep that maybe they regard other meetings as more important, like ASEAN, and for sure the upcoming Vladivostok meeting, because this is where they are making their treaties, they're making their investment plans and so forth. So all I'm saying is the speed of the integration is absolutely escalating and continuing. The Western establishments are absolutely unwilling to recognize that all what is happening is not the evil doing of Russia or China or any one of these countries, but it's the blowback against their own policies. And, the populations in the West is still, for the most part, relatively clueless, but those who do understand that the way out of the economic and financial crisis in Europe, for example, in Germany, in other countries, would be to cooperate fully with the countries of the global South. And, that is what the conference the Schiller Institute is going to have on Saturday is all about. We have excellent speakers lined up, very much representing the global South. So you will hear out of the horse's mouth, so to speak, what is the real intention of countries like, Latin American, African, Asian countries. And obviously they have a completely different view of the world. They're extremely optimistic. They're talking about space cooperation, nuclear power, breakthroughs in fusion, thermonuclear fusion power. And so, if you want to get an optimistic idea about the future, then you should definitely tune in this coming Saturday in the Schiller conference and be part of this movement, because it's one of the most exciting moments in history to see actually the emergence of a system which will put justice on the agenda.
Well, let me follow up what you mentioned about Xi Jinping not going to the G20. A U.S. blogger who follows us closely writes, "Thank you, Helga, for the work you're doing. The U.S. media is hyping what it is calling an economic meltdown in China's real estate sector, and there's speculation that President Xi Jinping is in political trouble. What are your thoughts on this? Or is this just more anti-China psychological warfare?"
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, look what China is doing. They have really transformed not only China, but many countries in Africa and in other parts of the global South. And these countries have become friends, not just allies or partners, but friends. Africans are saying China is a friend of Africa, and they have ample proof of it. Now, it is true that sometimes, the Chinese construction building is, sort of moving ahead because they have a large population of 1.4 billion people. And, to provide housing for such a large number of people, you cannot do the way you do it maybe in the United States, in the suburbs, that you pay one one single house after the other with a backyard and a little garden in front of it. You have to have, construction planning where you provide housing for everybody. And sometimes it did happen in the past, and it is also maybe happening to a certain extent now, that some of these building complexes are standing empty for a short period of time. But it always was an extremely short period until when these constructions have been filled up with people moving in there. So I think it's just, you can make a wrong story out of everything. If you try, you can take statistics and you take a segment and you take another segment from the same statistic and you prove the exact opposite. So I wouldn't give any credence to this, because look at what happens in Europe. Germany is collapsing, not China. The United States infrastructure is in an abysmal condition. Look at the infrastructure in China. If you take all the parameters of physical economy, China is still the engine of the world economy, and all the doomsday saying will not change that.
We're talking with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who we just heard from on the China question. You can send your questions to her at questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, a follow-up question to that came in from Dr. Balkrishna Korve, who asks, what are the short-range and long-range effects of the Belt and Road Initiative in the Global South?
Well, I think the short term will be more of the kind of projects what we have seen with the different corridors, about 6 large corridors in different parts of the world. More of the fast train building, like we see it between Kunming and Laos, or between Bandung and Jakarta in Indonesia. More projects of the kind which have started to transform Africa, especially in the last 10 years. So I think that will continue. I think that there will be, in the long run, much more emphasis on upgrading of labor force. China has started to do that already by, inviting by the tens of thousands students to come to China to be trained, or moving Chinese teams to different countries. But China is not trying to be the new hegemon. I think that is definitely not what my estimate is. And I would think that if the BRICS Plus continues to expand, as it should be and must be to make a new world economic order, then all the other countries who have significant industrial capacities, like India, like Japan, like Germany, if it's not dismantled until then, Switzerland, Italy, other countries who have a significant, especially machine tool sector, they will all become part of division of labor. Look at what is happening now in Southwest Asia, which was an area of complete colonial devastation for the last almost 100 years. But now, because of the rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Turkey playing a specific role in this configuration, there is actually the chance that all the conflicts which existed between the Shia and the Sunni Muslims can be ruled out and overcome through joint economic development. So, I can see that, people always say, who will be the country which has advantages? But if you look at it as a longer arch, it does not really matter if you start to build a railway in northwest or north-south in this country, or east-west, because eventually, the infrastructure will integrate worldwide, because that's the nature of things. If you take it back 100, 200 years, the infrastructure was very little. You had only a few railways, a few roads, a few waterways. But then as the development of industry and especially industry progressed, the infrastructure became more dense. Look at Germany. When Germany was at a high point, which unfortunately is now a couple of decades ago, we used to have an excellent infrastructure, integrating highways, railways, and waterways. And you could ship cargo goods and other goods, from one to the next, let's say from waterways to railway to truck, until you reached your final destination. You would try to minimize the truck aspect of the transport. But it was a very integrated, very dense infrastructure network. And that's exactly, the more developed a country becomes, the more important it is to have an integrated infrastructure, because it reduces the time of transport, loss of efficiency and so forth. So, when Xi Jinping announced the new Silk Road in 2013, 10 years ago in Kazakhstan, we published our entire studies, because we had proposed the Eurasian land bridge in 91 when the Soviet Union collapsed. We proposed a Eurasian land bridge connecting Europe and Asia through infrastructure corridors. And that, in a certain sense, is what became the New Silk Road. We called it already New Silk Road in 91. And, when Xi Jinping announced the New Silk Road in 2013, we published all our studies in a big book called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. And that was indeed, you have infrastructure connecting the southern tip of Argentina and Chile all the way going up through Latin America, Central America, North America, then connecting through a tunnel or a bridge through the Bering Strait to the Eurasian connection, basically the Trans-Siberian Railroad and other lines, going all the way to the tip of Lisbon, going from through the Strait of Gibraltar into Africa, all the way down through an infrastructure network to Cape of Good Hope. So theoretically, if this program will be realized, you can travel with the maglev fast train from the tip of Argentina or Chile all the way through the Bering Strait to the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa. Now, that is going to happen. It will happen for sure, because that is the way how mankind develops. So therefore, in the long run, what I see the Belt and Road becoming is an integral part of a joint infrastructure network in which all the different countries of the BRICS Plus and the New World Economic Order are cooperating to the benefit of all the countries participating in it. And if we don't have World War III, I will be absolutely certain that that is what will happen.
Helga, we have lots of questions coming in from all over the world, so I'm going to combine a couple of them for you. This one, 2 questions on Germany. A German who is now living in Canada writes that she's disgusted by what's going on in Germany. She referred to Chancellor Scholz reaffirming no nuclear power for Germany, upcoming meetings with the chemical sector, the collapse of the auto sector. And she asks, what's wrong with the people of Germany? How long will they tolerate this coalition? And a second question from a PhD student in the United States said he just read a book called When Kings Depart about what was done to Germany under the Versailles Treaty. And he said, could you compare what's being done to Germany today with what was done by the British and the French, especially after the World War I at Versailles?
Well, these are 2 very good questions. I think that the present German government is headed by a combination of know-nothings and weak figures. Therefore, when you look at German politics right now under the chancellorship of Olaf Scholz, now he wears this eye pad. it's one-sided, that's to say the least. It only looks in the Atlantic direction, and I think he probably wears the iPad so that he doesn't have to see the rest of the world and just can follow his tunnel vision of being a good vassal. I think that's what he's doing. And if you look at the direction of German politics under this leadership, it reminds me of a turtle which has pulled its head inside and then moves backward. It has put the rear guard into motion. So Germany is moving back to the Middle Ages. It's terrible. I think we are sitting on a powder keg because, myself and many other members of the Schiller Institute, we had lots of discussions in the couple of weeks past. And what you find is that the German population is in a state of absolute tension. Because, you ask somebody, they say, oh, everything what we built after the Second World War in generations is collapsing. They are destroying it. All the legislation they are making is ruining Germany. And that is the mood in the population. And they are angry. The problem is they don't see very well what they should do, because there is the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, which has a lot of increase in popularity because of this frustration. But there are also limits, because unfortunately there are some just frustrated people in it, but they also have some rather unholy characters in it, so that it's not really an alternative for most of the people. So that leaves the ordinary citizen really without much, hope. I think that therefore, the spreading of the news of what the BRICS countries are doing is the most important, because when the people in Germany would understand that the BRICS is not the enemy of Germany, but the partner and the potential future way out, then the thing can be solved. Because Germany has been an export-oriented nation, at least since Bismarck's time. And, Germany has not a lot of raw materials. And the high living standard was the result of a high ratio of scientific and technological development and exporting these goods, which then became very famous with the synonym made in Germany, which originally was, given to Germany by the occupying powers as a sign of shame, made in Germany, that Germany, But then because of the industriousness of the German people, it turned into a badge of honor, and people said, oh, made in Germany, that is high quality. And, that's why people were buying these products, even if they sometimes were a little bit more expensive than from other countries, because it stood for excellence. And that is now disappearing. Germany is falling behind in terms of patents, in terms of auto. Germany used to be a leading auto exporting country. It's now falling back very rapidly. And with it, a lot of other sectors. So Germany is in front of an economic collapse, which I foresee to hit in the coming fall and winter big time. Because then the high energy prices will mean that a lot of people will be hit hard. A lot of business will go bankrupt, is already happening. Restaurants, handcraft, middle-level industry will all collapse. And, actually, at that point, I think the thing will explode. And at that point, it is extremely important that the news about what is the potential of cooperating with the BRICS countries in the development of the global South is that point which can really change the directionality of Germany. So, that's why we have these conferences. That's why, if you are a German living in Canada, help us to spread the news about it. If you have relatives, make them aware of this upcoming conference and what we are doing, because we need a lot of people fighting with us because, it's really a big fight, because the occupying powers still possess Germany to a very large extent. And since people are not sovereign in their head, leave alone practical sovereignty of the country, we still have to fight very hard. Now, as compared to the second question, I would say absolutely yes. Because, from the standpoint of the empire, and, if you understand empire not as countries, but as a system of oligarchy, which moved, from the Roman Empire, even before the, Persian Empire, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Venetian Empire, the Anglo-Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and maybe you can say the Anglo-American Empire today. They basically have spotted Germany as a potential threat to the system of oligarchy. Why am I saying that? Now, Germany, for a variety of reasons, produced a couple of thinkers which were really outstanding. Nicolaus of Cues, 15th century, Kepler, Leibniz. In music, the classical music, with few exceptions like Verdi and some others, a lot of it comes from Germany, the great classical music. In literature, you had great poets like Lessing, Schiller, Heine, Goethe to a certain extent, and many other breakthroughs in terms of science, discoveries. So then, during the classical period in Germany, you had the combination of Friedrich Schiller, who, was this towering giant, who developed the aesthetic education as a way to get people free, the inner freedom. And then he had this friend, Wilhelm von Humboldt, who turned that theory of aesthetic education of Schiller into an education system, the famous Humboldt education system. And despite the fact that Wilhelm von Humboldt, as one of the Prussian reformers, was only in office very shortly, I think less than a year, he still could implement his system, the Humboldt Gymnasium, the study and teaching principle in the universities, so that the influence of Humboldt was very, very far beyond his actual time in office. And, I think that if he would have remained in office, that was basically a process which was finished through the Congress of Vienna and Metternich's reforms. If he would have stayed longer, and if he could have implemented the Humboldt education system fully, every child would have had the chance to become a genius. And there is no bigger threat to the system of oligarchy than having a lot of geniuses who are inner free, inner directed people who will not accept to be in a condition of inferiority to some nobility or some king or some princess or some other superfluent, unnecessary kind of person. So I think that is why from the beginning of the 19th century, and increasingly so with Bismarck and the industrialization, the British targeted Germany as a place to be suppressed. And that was the case with Versailles. One could even say that, that went into the motives of the First World War to a very large extent. Versailles was the deliberate idea to keep Germany down. The Rapallo Treaty tried to overturn that. The assassination of Rathenau was supposed to really make sure Germany would not recover. And even the sponsoring of Hitler through international financial forces had the idea, that if you put Hitler into power, then a war between Germany and Russia will be the logical outcome. And then in the post-war period, it was again, keep Germany down. What is the purpose of NATO? Keep the Americans in, keep the Russians out, and keep the Germans down. That was everybody knew that. And then when the German unification happened in 1990, Germany had gained its right to sovereignty because of the peaceful revolution in East Germany. Nevertheless, the mechanisms were put into focus to keep Germany down again by submitting it to the euro, to put it under the control of the Maastricht Agreement. So it's a long story that the aim of the oligarchy was to keep Germany down. And since most people have not really studied that history, they largely are in the dark. And I'm of the opinion for a very long time that people have to study their history to understand why we are where we are at. But coming back to the answer to the first question, I think there is a very quick way out, and that is join with the BRICS and join with the majority of the world population, and Germany will have a middle-sized, middle-level place, but a beautiful place if we revive our own classical tradition.
Okay, I'd like to see if we can get two more questions in that I think are important. One is from Minashi, who asks, how might the potential addition of the African Union to the G20 impact the BRICS plus nations?
I think that should happen. I don't know if the G20 will be the form forever, because that again is not totally representative. Why these 20 countries, that is 19 countries plus the European Union. If the European Union can be in as a member, then all the more the African Union should be equally a member. So I'm for that, but I don't think that combination of the G20 is the last word on it either, because why not have a representation of all, the G1, or the G all. The United Nations is basically that already, and one could think about reforms of the structure which would make sure that the voice of every nation on the planet is being heard and is effective.
Here's a question from Pat, who said, thank you to the Schiller Institute for addressing the attacks going on Argentina, which of course was one of the countries added to the BRICS at the summit last week in South Africa. And she asks, do you see the Argentine people standing strong and committed to this policy, and how can we support them?
Well, I think, the battle for Argentina is a battle for all of humanity, because Argentina, is not a backward country. Argentina used to be the number 3 in the world at the turn of the 19th century. So it has a tradition of being a proud and developed nation. And it has been under attack by the IMF, by the British. Think about the Malvinas War, which they called the Falkland War, but it was really the Malvinas War. So Argentina, again, is one of those countries who have been targeted a lot. Now, the Schiller Institute is presently circulating a policy paper which is coming to the defense of Argentina, and it has a couple of suggestions, programmatic suggestions, which come from the thinking of my late husband, LaRouche, who in 1982 had designed a similar program for López Portillo, when López Portillo had asked him to help him against the capital flight, which was organized at that time against the peso. So basically, we are circulating this document, and it proposes a whole bunch of measures which, if implemented, would solve the problem. First of all, impose capital controls to prevent the capital flight, nationalize the central bank, issue credit on the basis of the sovereign right of every country to issue credit for clearly defined development. low interest, long duration. At the same time, choose certain projects which uplift the country into a new directionality. One is the bi-oceanic railway, which would help all of Latin America to become more integrated and productive, and make Argentina a member of the spacefaring nations, because Argentina does have a space tradition, and other Latin American countries should also be part of that. Picking up on what Prime Minister Modi had said at the BRICS meeting, that he wants to create a space exploration consortium of the BRICS. Because, if countries make that jump, leapfrog, so to speak, to be part of the totally exciting experience of going to have lunar missions. India has now a mission to the sun, observing the processes in the sun. Previously, there were missions to Mars. That catapults a country into a completely different orientation, going for maximum scientific breakthroughs, and especially, it changes the identity from just being earthlings, thinking that we are, with limited resources and all this green propaganda, and you realize that the universe is so gigantically big and there is no limits to growth, and that is the most important experience a country can have. So go to our websites, download this paper, and circulate it widely, because it's not just for Argentina. It's something which every country needs to know who wants to defend the common good of its own people. So I think there's lots to do, but I want to really appeal to you. We need a lot of people working with us, fighting with us, because it's the most exciting period in history right now, because it is possible to make a change for the better.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us again today. I think people should take to heart what you're saying. Give up being a spectator or a complainer. Register at theschillerinstitute.com for the conference this Saturday, and register other people. Get a whole discussion group going. People complain all the time about the fact that there's a censorship industrial complex keeping you from knowing what's going on. Break it. Get people involved in the discussion. And Helga, I guess we'll see you next week. But people should come this Saturday to the online conference.
I hope to see you there.